The sons of Fenris they are, hardened in the forge of their harsh world, eager for the battle and honor. They are the Grey Warriors, ashen like the wolf, whose greatest joy to hear the clamor of steel amidst the din of war. This was a Space Wolves Catechism. Hello, and welcome back to the Wisdom of Warhammer channel. And in today's video, I'll be going over the history of the Space Wolves Legion. I'll be going over their time during the Great Crusade before Leman was found, and then I will go over their time after Leman was found. Then I will go over their time during the Horus Heresy, and then at the end, I'll be going over the structure of the Space Wolves Legion. Like in my previous videos, I do not own the artwork in the video, and all things Warhammer are owned by Games Workshop and Black Library. So, with the intro out of the way, let's get the video started, shall we? Since their inception on Terra, the Space Wolves were apart from the other legions due to their origins being shrouded, as it gained a reputation that was fearsome due to their prowess in combat. They were known as relentless shock troops that were tireless pursuers and peerless hunters, and their way of warfare was, of course, unexpected violence that was unsubtle but very swift. Like a lot of the legions, the Sixth Legion's history during the early years of their service was hidden, but there is speculation that the Emperor created the Space Wolves for a specific reason similar to the Salamanders in the Alpha Legion. These three legions would be called the Trefoil, and the details of the sub-project were classified, and only the Emperor and some of his closest confidants knew what the Trefoil was created for. The recruits for the Sixth Legion were the most hyper-violent, barbaric, regressive, and of course, outcasted cultures of Terra, but with the diversity of the recruitment was individual by individual basis, rather than recruited from one specific area. You may think that this legion was really effective in the early years due to the diversity, but that is false. They bonded and trained in isolation from the other legions due to their secretive role. Eventually, this extremely violent legion was molded into a coherent military force under the orders of the Strategos of the Emperor of Mankind's inner circle. Another thing that made the Sixth Legion singular was of course their gene seed, although it separated itself from the other proto-legions, but at the time the other legions would not know until later. But it wasn't all good, because in the early years of their creation, it was extremely hard because it was the toughest of the legions, save for the 20th Legion, but the records of the 20th were unknown. One of the major reasons for the slow growth of the Sixth was of course the fatal implantation rate with the Legion candidates, but it would eventually become stable after their Primarch Leman Russ was found. They did fight in smaller engagements, but never in massive battles, even though they wanted bigger prey. And when the gene cults of Luna began to mass produce the legions, the Sixth Legion was saved. The reason why is because the Selenar tried to sabotage some of the production, which affected the Emperor's children, White Scars, and the Blood Angels. But after 10 years of the conquest of the Sol System, the Legion of the Sixth was able to begin their bloody and epic history, and the first great battle was called the Compliance of 1122 on the planet called Delsfan. The enemy that the Sixth Legion fought was a militarized plutocracy, and they were led by the Emperor, and then 3,500 legionaries descended to the planet, and this war would be very brutal. The Compliance of 1122 was a massacre that bordered on genocide. Let me explain this battle. It was a test for the Sixth Legion, and it started out fine. The Legion Master of the Sixth, named Enoch Rathvin, ordered the orbital bombardment against the enemy city and planned drop pod assaults and dropship landings in different landing zones of the city. The plan of the Sixth Legion attack was similar to the spearhead assaults of the 16th Legion that was led by Horus, but it delved into something else completely. A majority of the defenders were slaughtered where they stood, and they had no military discipline because they were a civilian militia, and when they began to retreat, the Sixth Legion fell into a hunter's frenzy. With the enemy being mixed up with the populace, the battle became a massacre that bordered on complete genocide. But the planet would be conquered, proving the Sixth Legion as an effective killing force. When the higher-ups of the Imperium heard of what happened, they said that the Space Wolves were ill-disciplined, but the Emperor didn't care for their opinions of the Sixth because they were good and loyal soldiers. For the next 12 years, the Space Wolves served in the active fleet command during the Great Crusade, and their numbers would grow to 5,000 at the Battle of Hintal, and then 7,000 during the campaign of Rilov's Landing. Due to these small numbers, the Space Wolves assisted the other legions or Imperial Guard against pockets of small hard resistance during massive campaign. And as time went on, Rathfin turned the legion into rapid moving hunters and are good in close quarters combat. And if there were rebels, they would use brutally effective operations that resemble a beast ripping apart prey with its claws. Yeah, the 6th Legion was a pack of rabid animals, and they needed something to tame them. And the Legion created the Disciplinary Corps, who would put a leash on his fellow battle brothers, both on the battlefield and off the battlefield. They had the most disciplinary legionaries other than the 12th Legion, the Warhounds, and the Malorian revolt would show the need for these brothers. The planet of Malorian was recently brought into the Imperium, and when they rebelled, the 6th Legion sent the 8th Company to teach them a lesson and bring them back into the Imperium. The battle against the rebels began as well-planned precision strike, but that did not last long and it became a slaughter, covering the entire battle zone into a bloodbath, drenching everything. It was so bad that the preservation of the industry of the planet was close to collapse, and thanks to the Disciplinary Corps, who had done some executions which saved the planet. When the 20th year of the Great Crusade came around, people wondered why the 6th Legion were the way they were, because they were the most bestial. The answer for this question was revealed and was called the Canis Helix, and to summarize it, the lower ranks of the 6th Legion would be beaten into submission by their stronger leaders, who were the most violent instead of being obedient to legitimate authority. Even in combat, when the enemy of the 6th was broken and fled from the Space Wolves, they were more excited to fight and would result in unnecessary butchery, and they would be named the Rout. This was an insult because the Rout were dogs and hounds that scavenged the red waste of Terra, that harassed the refugees and the wastelanders who were near death, which made these beasts brave. But as time went on, the word Rout was more of a macabre joke when it was used because the Legion would change when Leman Russ was found. Leman Russ was the second found Primarch during the Great Crusade, after Horus, and he was found on the frozen death world called Fenris. Fenris was an extremely brutal place due to how deadly the environment and the wildlife were, and when the Imperial scientists looked at the planet and did some studies, they concluded that no human could survive on Fenris due to its constant volcanic eruptions that created new islands every year, and the wildlife was so deadly that the scientists wondered how people fought these things. When Leman Russ was found, the scientists observed during gene seed implantation that the people of Fenris were extremely hardened to a point where they were the most hardened people in the Imperium. When the Emperor found Leman, who was already the war king of the Russ tribe, and the Emperor took him to meet Horus, and then Rathfin met his father, and Leman smelled his genetic code within the Legion Master. When the recruits were being screened and implanted with the 6th Legion gene seed, a lot of the personal guard of Leman became Space Marines, which is weird. The reason for this weirdness was that these warriors were pretty old when the Imperium arrived, but still wanted to join their king in the Great Crusade. During their ascension into the Legion, the Imperials were surprised to see a lot of them survive the surgery due to their tough minds and bodies, and this did help to say that the warriors of Fenris were built differently, so to speak. There were rumors that the people who settled on Fenris during the Dark Age of technology used genetic manipulation to make themselves and their descendants more hardened, which made them survive Fenris without much tech. But going back on track, Leman Russ studied under his father in the ways of the Imperium and his Legion's history, and he realized he needed to reforge them. He ordered his Wolf Guard, or Varangi, who served under him on Fenris throughout the Legion, to show them who was in charge, and they did this pretty smoothly in the beginning. Rathfin gave up the mantle of leader of the 6th to Leman without open challenge, but he did it grudgingly, And Lehman knew this, and he knew a lot of the other Space Wolf legionaries would agree, so he had a plan. He would rouse his sons, and if there were any resentments and signs of disobedience, the Varangi would allow their new Terran brothers to challenge them, and a message spread throughout the Legion. Lehman's rule was not to be questioned. But Lehman knew that his Legion needed a hunt that could show off the violence of the Wolf King, and he had the perfect choice. The Space Wolves were led by Lehman Russ against the Wheel of Fire, and this war was against an Orc empire to the galactic east of Segmentum Solar, and it was in multiple systems. This area was filled with mostly Orcs and some minor threats that the Wolves killed, and in the area there were a lot of Space Hulks, Marauders, and Warp Storms that came from this place, and it made it for a perfect place for a hunt for the 6th Legion. This war was very brutal for the 6th, and it would eventually be purged of the Xenos, and one of the more notable battles was against an Orc empire led by Mashog, with the assistance of the White Scars and Iron Warriors. I did go into detail about this battle in my Iron Warriors video, but the Wheel of Fire lasted 5 Terran years, and it never slowed down, but did cost a lot of Space Wolves' lives, including Enoch Rathvin, who was going mad due to the bloodlust of the Canis Helix. By the end, the Space Wolves were not the undisciplined, unchained hunters of the Imperium anymore. They were the disciplined, unchained hunters of the Imperium. Lehman had given his Legion purpose because they needed it, and now they were the wolves who stalked the stars. Every battle, Lehman Russ led from the front with his Frostblade named Krakenmaw, and with his Fenrisian wolf brethren named Greggy and Frecky, and throughout the 6th Legion, Fenrisian wolves fought alongside their transhuman brothers. In those years of the Crusade, the 6th Legion were the warlords of the Imperium, with Lehman and his wolves leading the other legions in Imperial Guard. Now the reputation of the Space Wolves was now one of high reverence throughout the Imperial military, and the high-ranking general saw the tactical genius of the Wolf King and his sons. By the time the 6th Legion gained more numbers after their losses at the Wheel of Fire campaign, and in the time the Primarchs Ferrus Manus, Fulgrim, Vulcan, and Rogel Dorn were found and joined their legions. And during the next few decades, the 6th Legion had a lot of successful campaigns and battles, either alone or fighting alongside another war fleet or legion. The foes they faced were the Orcs, Eldar, and an ancient alien tyrant on the planet of Nomon. And here's a fun fact. The SDC that was found here is an ancient battle tank that was named in honor of Lehman, and it was called the Lehman Russ Battle Tank. Lehman and the Space Wolves were called the Vilka Fenrica, which means Wolves of Fenris in the Fenrisian tongue, and this next campaign would be called the Compliance of Moloch. This compliance was a massive one on the newly discovered night world called Moloch, and the legions that were here were the 6th, 16th, 5th, and 1st alongside their Primarchs and even the Emperor himself. There were Imperial Guard, Mechanicus, and Titan assets, and the battle was huge, and at the end the Knight Cyprian Devon of House Devon became the Imperial Governor of Moloch, but a secret meeting in the core of the planet with the Emperor and his sons. But I'm not allowed to speak about that because the records are non-existent. Then the Space Wolves left the planet and continued conquering. Years later, the Space Wolves and the Dark Angels fought alongside each other with their Primarchs at their head at the Imperial world called Dulan, and from this, a tradition between the two legions was created. The rebel governor insulted the Wolf King, and with this, Lehman vowed to take his head, and he and his legion charged into battle without a plan. The Lion and his legion did have a plan, and at the end, the Primarch of the First took the head of the rebel governor, and Lehman did not like this, so the two brothers brawled for a day, and at the end, Lehman was knocked out. When Lehman awoke, he saw that his brother left, so he and his legion did that too, and off to the next conflict, which we won of king killing. This event would be named the Night of the Wolf, and it was against Angron and his world leaders on Gehenna. The reason why they fought was because the world leaders had been doing dangerous surgeries with the implantation of the butcher's nails into their legionaries. The atrocities of the world leaders were so bad that the Astropaths could hear the screams of the worlds that Angron and his sons slaughtered, committing genocide to everything in their path. With the Emperor hearing about this, he sent the Wolf King and his legion to tell them to stop with the implantation. When Lehman arrived, the two legions fought, which was the first Astartes versus Astartes conflict ever recorded, and both sides retreated, calling it a victory, and the Space Wolves continued to do what they did until the Horus Heresy would begin. And I will talk about those campaigns before the Horus Heresy, and we will start with the Garu campaigns. This next campaign was a joint one with the Thousand Sons and the Space Wolves, and it was a successful battle. During the campaign on Agahu, Magnus was enthralled by a psychic force in the place called the Mountain, which was named by the Thousand Sons, and there was a tomb of a demonic force called the Deseti. This demonic force must have been trapped on the planet by the Eldar, and when it was released, it caused havoc upon the world and against the Space Marines. With the efforts of Magnus and his sons alongside the 5th Company of the Space Wolves led by Jarl Omodi Skarson's son, the demonic force was destroyed. Then after this battle, the Thousand Sons and their Primarch, alongside the 5th Company of the 6th Legion, went to regroup with Lehman's force in the Arcreach Cluster. The Arcreach Cluster campaign was led by Leman Russ alongside his Legion and the Word Bearers and Thousand Sons, with their Primarchs leading them, and this would lead to conflict between the Wolves and the Sons of Magnus. The area of space was found by the Word Bearers' 47th Expeditionary Fleet, and this place had 6 star systems under the enemy empire in this cluster. When the 3 legions were at the final battle, the Space Wolves were destroying the libraries of the planet, but Magnus wanted to keep this knowledge to study. This almost caused a fight between the 2 Primarchs and their legions, but thanks to Lorgar it did not happen, and Lehman warned the Crimson King and then proceeded to destroy the planet and all the knowledge from this newly crushed empire. Now this next war was one of the more brutal ones for the Space Wolves, and it was against the Rangda, who was a foe of the Dark Angels and had fought them a few times during the Great Crusade. During this series of battles against the Rangda, the White Scars companies assisted in finding their nests, and then either the Space Wolves and or Dark Angels would come and slaughter the Xenos in their nests. The records of the Xenocide say that the Lion and Lehman relentlessly hunted down the Rangda and used exterminatus actions on worlds including Imperial worlds that had a lot of Rangda infestations. After this campaign, the Space Wolves were called to the world of Nicaea for the Council of Nicaea, and they would be the security of the council just in case certain parties would cause a ruckus. Then, after the council, Lehman and his legion just hunted down the remaining threats to the Imperium until the Horus Heresy would begin. Before I talk about that time, I want to talk about how they recorded things in the 6th Legion, and they didn't have a lot of remembrancers and narrators because the Space Wolves and Lehman believed in the word of saga and word of mouth. From this, the history of the Space Wolves was one of myths and legend as time went on, until it was said otherwise, and the secrets of the wolves would be kept under wraps. Another thing the Space Wolves had to deal with during their time was the curse of the Wolfen, which involved the Canis Helix, which gave the Space Wolves a sort of wolf-like appearance. The curse of the Wolfen was when a 6th Legion Marine falls into a sort of bloodlust/frenzy and kills all enemies, and a majority of the time these Space Wolves transform into werewolf-like creatures that are strong. During the Battle of Dulin, the Lion and his sons found out about this after the rebel governor had a video recording of these beasts in a cage, and the Lion kept the secret to himself and his legion. Some of the people in the Imperial science branches say that the gene seed of the wolves had actually DNA of these ancient predators of Terra, and I'm wondering if the Emperor went to Fenris for a sample for the 6th Legion. Now, going into the Space Wolves' time during the Horus Heresy, we are going to start at the raising of Prospero, which was a terrible thing that happened, but it was a manipulation tactic from the corrupted War Master. Magnus, seeing that his brother Horus had turned traitor, he used his psychic power to warn his father, and doing this caused a demonic incursion on Terra. Disappointed in his son, the Emperor ordered the Wolf King and his sons to bring Magnus and his sons in chains to Terra to face judgment. On their way to Prospero, Horus changed the orders and said that it was from their father saying to kill Magnus and his sons. Lehman offered his brother the chance to surrender because the Thousand Sons had a spy that was in the 6th Legion, and the Wolf King knew this from the start. When the 6th Legion arrived, the Thousand Sons panicked and prepared for battle, and when the fighting began, the Space Wolves were destroying the Sons of Magnus until the Thousand Sons used their psychic power. Eventually, the two Primarchs fought, and Lehman beat his brother up and broke his back, but that victory was short-lived as Magnus asked for help from the Changer of Ways. After the raising of Prospero, the Wolf King and his legion went to the Alaxis Nebula, but unknown to them, the 20th Legion was sent by Horus to deal with the wolves of the Emperor. The twin Primarchs of the 20th Legion, Alpharius and Omegon, were there, and these two held a deep grudge against Lehman because he criticized them for their methods of war. Realizing that he and his legion were outnumbered and outgunned, they called for aid to the nearby Khan and his legion, but not knowing what was going on, the Khan refused and went to find answers. Lehman felt hopeless and locked himself in his chambers on his flagship called the Hrafnakel. While he was in there, the Space Wolf named First Captain Gunnar Gunhild took command of the Legion to fight against the 20th. Lehman left his chambers after Bjorn of Tra reminded his father about his role as the Emperor's executioner, and this got the Wolf King out of his chambers and led his sons. Gunhild and his crew on the ship named Ragnarok sacrificed themselves to slow the Alpha Legion, but this didn't last long. A boarding party of Alpha Legion Terminators, and in this party Alpharius was disguised as one of his Terminators, and he fought his brother. Thankfully, a Dark Angel's fleet, led by Chapter Master Alathios, arrived, and from this the 20th Legion was pushed back, and there was a Dark Angel that infiltrated the 6th Legion to see if they were loyal to the Emperor. This Dark Angel was discovered by a rune priest and was brought before Russ, and from this the Dark Angel let the Chapter Master know that the Wolves of Fenris were loyalists. The two loyalist forces went their separate ways, and Lehman and the Space Wolves went back to Terra to prepare for an assassination attempt against the War Master. When the Wolves attacked the War Master's fleet, this was brutal and it failed, and Lehman was severely wounded, and as his legion retreated, some of his sons sacrificed themselves to save their father. The legion was broken and lost, but they made their way to the homeworld of the Raven Lord Corvus Corax, and they licked their wounds while Corax watched over his brother. After some time, the Lion and his fleet of Dark Angels arrived, and the three brothers talked for some time. Then the Space Wolves and Dark Angels with their Primarchs, alongside a contingent of Raven Guard, went on a vengeance crusade while on their way to Terra. They destroyed Chemos, Barbaros, Colchis, and Nuceria, and then made their way to Terra. But they were too late because Sanguinius was dead and the Emperor was crippled and put on the Golden Throne, and the Dark Angels and Space Wolves brutally slaughtered all traitors in their way. After a few years, the Space Wolves went back to Fenris to see their homeworld, and now the Legion was shattered, and it was now a chapter, and they didn't like it but accepted it. During their feast, Lehman spoke to his sons one last time, and left with his personal guard and gave the title of Wolf King to Bjorn the Fell-Handed. Now, I have gotten to the end of the history of the Space Wolves Legion, and now I will be going over the structure of the 6th Legion. Starting off with the command structure, we have of course Leman Russ, the Primarch, and under him are the Wolf Lords and the Ironheart, which were the advisors of the Space Wolves. Each of the great companies of the 6th Legion were under the command of a Jarl, and under them were the Sanguin or Claw leaders that led the low-ranked Space Wolf legionaries. And these claws were kept in line by the Huscarl, which were sergeants, and other legions didn't really have these kinds of warriors in their legions due to their discipline. Now the great companies had different roles in the legion, but they were still similar to the other legions, and we'll start with Un Company, which was the first company. Un Company was filled with Terminator elites and were known as the Breaker of Rings and numbered at 3,000, and were commanded by Jarl Gunnar Gunhild. Twa Company was known as the Thread Cutters and had 800 veterans and 60 dreadnoughts and were led by Jarl Holmi Longanger. Thra Company were the Eagle Keepers and had 9,800 assault marines and were armored support roles, and were commanded by Jarl Ogvai Helmshot. 4 Company were the Bloodworms Masters and had 8,600 marines that were mostly breachers and were led by Jarl Luviv Close-Handed. 5 Company was called the Bloodstorm and had 10,000 Marines that did mixed roles with light armor support and were led by Jarl Olafmodi Skarstensson. Sek Company was led by Jarl Skunar. Sep Company were called the White Flames Wielders and had 5,200 Marines that were Destroyer Marines and Scorcher units, led by Jarl Horavi Redblade. Fortois Company was known as the Slaughter Fire Heralds and had 9,500 Marines that were in reconnaissance roles and were commanded by Jarl Boldar Vindunsur. Tratra were the Serpents of the Battle Moon and had 7,900 Marines that served as support, heavy weapons, and rapier units, led by Jarl Strugard Jokensen. Deck Company was led by Jarl Hemtal. Elva Company were the Sea Flame Bearers, and they had 9,200 Marines who were veterans from Terran-born Space Wolves and were led by Jarl Veldi Helsdawn. Tolv Company was known as the Shieldnars and had 8,700 Marines that were, of course, the close combat Marines, led by Jarl Jomgar. Dektra was known as the Corpse Renders and had 600 Marines that served as light infantry units and were led by Jarl Joran Bloodhowl. Now, that is the list of the great companies during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, and the Wolves of Fenris had Iron Priests, which were the Tech Marines. The Wolf Priests were the Storm Seers of the Space Wolves without the psychic power, and speaking of Psykers, we have the Rune Priests, who are the Librarians of the Legion and used runes to cast powers. The Rune Priests said they got their powers from the spirit of their homeworld, Fenris, which I think is true, but it is still connected to the warp. Now, due to the Canis Helix, the Space Wolves had Bloodclaws, who were the youngest and reckless Space Wolves, and they were led by the Grey Hunters, who were the more seasoned warriors of the Legions and were able to control their bloodlust. The veterans of the basic Space Wolves were called the Longfangs, who looked more like werewolves, and each Space Wolf legionary would get there if they lived long enough. The Wolf Guard were elites who guarded the Wolf Lords, which was another name for the Jarls, and the Ehrenjar were the personal guard of Leman Russ, who were there with him when Leman was on Fenris before he was found. Now, that was the structure of the Space Wolves Legion during the Horus Heresy and Great Crusade. Now we have gotten to the end of the video on the history of the Space Wolves Legion during the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy, as well as their Legion structure. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and if you did, hit the like button and share it with someone who would like this content. If you are new and would like to see more content, hit the subscribe button and bell notification to be notified for when a new video comes out. I hope you guys have a good day, and I will see you guys in the next video. This is Wisdom of Warhammer, signing off.